Welcome to Simply Davy Sue's Southern Whispers. Step into a world where front porches hold secrets, faith carries folks through the hardest days, and the mountains whisper stories only the heart can hear. I invite you into tender moments, gentle humor, and the kind of Southern warmth that feels just like home. Welcome in, friends. I'm glad you're here with me for another story. So let's get right into the introduction. April in the mountains has a way of stirring things awake. Dogwoods blushing white, redbuds humming pink, and the air carrying that soft promise that winter's long sigh is finally over. But even with spring stretching her arms across Willow Creek, the people weren't quite themselves. Smiles were thin, laughter was scarce, and hope felt like something folks remembered instead of something they carried. 12-year-old Jonah Parker noticed it long before anyone said a word. He saw it in the way Mr. Talley swept the sidewalk slower each morning, and how Miss Lila's porch swing barely moved anymore. But it wasn't until he overheard his mama talking to a neighbor that he realized just how heavy the town had grown. And that's when Jonah decided he wasn't too small to do something big. This week's story is called The Boy Who Planted Hope. It was the first warm week of April when Jonah sat on the front steps, tying his shoes for the third time just to keep his hands busy. Mama stood by the fence, talking to Miss Lila in that low, tired voice grown-ups use when they don't want children to worry. "This town's just worn thin," Mama murmured. "Feels like folks are carrying more than they can hold." Miss Lila nodded, her eyes soft with concern. "We need something to lift us up again." Jonah didn't move, but their words settled deep inside him, like seeds landing in good soil. That evening, while Mama washed dishes and the sun dipped behind the ridge, Jonah slipped out into the shed. He rummaged through jars of seeds he'd saved from last summer's garden: marigolds, cosmos, snapdragons, and a whole jar of wildflower mixes he'd collected from the meadow behind the church. He filled his pockets until they bulged, grabbed his little hand shovel, and stepped into the cool April dusk. He started at the church, tucking seeds along the walkway where the congregation's footsteps had worn the earth bare. Then he moved to the post office, scattering colored to be along the brick wall. He planted beside the feed store, the library steps, and even the old bench where Mr. Talley liked to sit and watch the world go by. Every night that week, Jonah planted hope in the quiet hours, kneeling in the dirt, whispering little prayers over each handful of seeds. Grow strong, grow bright, help somebody smile. And April, generous as always, answered. By the second week, tiny green shoots began to poke through the soil. Folks noticed first thing in the mornings, little surprises of color where there had been nothing but tired ground. "Well, would you look at that?" Miss Lila said, bending down to touch a cluster of pink cosmos. "These weren't here yesterday." Mr. Talley stood straighter than he had in months. "Somebody's been busy." Mama paused on her walk home from work, her hand pressed to her heart. "It's like the town's waking up." Jonah watched from the porch, trying to hide the grin tugging at his cheeks. But Mama was no fool. That afternoon, she found his muddy shoes by the shed door, the seed jars half empty, and a trail of dirt leading straight to his room. She stepped inside quietly, where Jonah sat reading, pretending not to notice her. She knelt beside him, brushed a bit of soil from his sleeve, and whispered, "Baby, did you do all this?" Jonah swallowed hard. "I just wanted folks to feel better, and I wanted you to smile again." Mama pulled him into her arms, holding him like he was the brightest thing in the whole month of April. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "you didn't just plant flowers. You planted hope." Word spread quickly, and soon the whole town joined in. People brought seeds, bulbs, and cuttings from their own yards. Children painted little signs that read, "Grow joy," and "Hope lives here." Porch swings started moving again. Laughter returned to the sidewalks. And Willow Creek, once weary and gray, bloomed into a patchwork of color that could have even made the angels pause and smile. All because one boy believed he could make things better. So the reflection of this week's story is, hope's like a wildflower. Doesn't ask permission, just grows where it's needed. Sometimes it comes quietly, carried in the pockets of a child, planted in the dark, watered with faith. Jonah reminded Willow Creek of something they'd forgotten. That small acts, done with a big heart, can change the whole feel of a place. And maybe that's the lesson tucked inside this April story. When the world feels heavy, plant something. When people seem tired, scatter kindness like wildflower seeds. And when hope feels far away, remember it only takes one person to bring it back into bloom. I hope you enjoyed that story this week, and I hope you'll come back next week for another one. May these stories that I have written wrap around you like a well loved quilt. May they remind you that God is near, hope is steady, and joy often comes softly, like a whisper on a southern breeze.